Why empire rise, why they reach a peak and eventually fall. Why is it that the civilizations rise to such prominence that they influence geopolitics, and eventually fall into irrelevance, and disappear leaving remnants behind? Ibn Khaldun explores such ideas and coins the theory of Asabiyyah. Asabiyyah refers to the deep sense of solidarity and loyalty that binds a group together. It could be religion, ideology, or a certain goal. He argues that the Asabiyyah is the force behind power, and history could not be understood without recognizing the power of social cohesion or solidarity. If we see in tribal societies, especially those living in deserts or harsh climatic areas, Asabiyyah would be strongest because survival depends on mutual reliance. The hardship of nomadic life produces toughness, discipline, and a willingness to sacrifice for the group. Due to this, the people would support their leader, who would also have rose to prominence with the trust of people. This unity, in turn, creates military strength and political authority. Ibn Khaldun stresses this by saying,
تتحقق السلطة الملكية من خلال التفوق، والتفوق هو نتيجة الشعور الجماعي. Royal authority is achieved through superiority, and superiority is the result of group feeling.
In other words, no dynasty can rise without Asabiyyah at its core. When a nomadic group with strong Asabiyyah confronts a wealthy and sedentary society, Ibn Khaldun argues that the nomads often win. Their unity gives them resilience, while the settled people, softened by luxury, have lost their cohesion. In conquering cities and fertile lands, these tribes establish dynasties that rest on the foundation of their collective solidarity. However, Ibn Khaldun makes it clear that Asabiyyah is not permanent. As the conquering group becomes accustomed to wealth, palaces, and servants, their solidarity begins to erode. Luxury breeds selfishness, and reliance on mercenaries replaces the shared bonds of hardship. The very strength that once enabled conquest weakens over time, planting the seeds of decline. Modern scholars such as Ernest Gellner and Sinaisa Malisevic have compared Ibn Khaldun's Asabiyyah to modern theories of social cohesion. They note that shared struggle tends to unite people, while prosperity and individual comfort fragment society. In this sense, Ibn Khaldun anticipated debates about nationalism, solidarity, and social capital centuries before modern sociology. Building on the foundation of Asabiyyah, Ibn Khaldun developed his famous theory of the life cycle of empires. He believed that dynasties and states, like living organisms, pass through stages of birth, growth, maturity, and death. Typically, a dynasty lasts about 3 generations, or roughly 120 years. He explains,
كقاعدة عامة، لا تدوم أي سلالة أكثر من 3 أجيال، والجيل يماثل متوسط عمر الفرد، أي 40 عاماً. As a rule, no dynasty lasts beyond the lifespan of 3 generations. A generation is identical with the average duration of the life of a single individual, namely 40 years.
Ibn Khaldun admits that some dynasties may last longer or shorter. He presents this cycle as a general pattern observable throughout history. The first stage is that of conquest and formation. Here, the dynasty is founded by a leader and his companions, hardened by desert life and united by strong Asabiyyah. They are still close to their tribal roots, and their unity gives them military superiority. The second stage is that of consolidation. The dynasty stabilizes its rule, establishes administration, taxation, and laws, and begins to govern a settled population. At this stage, Asabiyyah remains, but it is no longer as raw and intense as in the founding generation. The third stage is that of luxury and expansion. The dynasty reaches its peak, wealth increases, sciences and arts flourish, architecture and knowledge thrives. But this prosperity comes with danger. The rulers and elites, enjoying luxury, begin to lose the toughness of their ancestors. They depend increasingly on servants, slaves, and mercenaries, while their internal bonds weaken. Ibn Khaldun describes this vividly.
الجيل الثالث ينسى قسوة الصحراء كما لو أنها لم تكن موجودة أبداً. يصل الفخامة إلى ذروتها ويتم تدمير الشعور الجماعي تماماً. The third generation forgets the desert roughness as if it had never existed. Luxury reaches its peak, and group feeling is altogether destroyed.
After this peak, upon the fourth stage, the dynasty enters slow decline and weakness. The rulers become detached from their people, indulging in extravagance and excess. Corruption spreads through government institutions, and the dynasty no longer has the discipline to defend itself without external help. The prestige of the founding ancestors is lost, and the ruling family clings to power through force and wealth alone. In return, major groups emerge rebelling against the dynasty. Slowly, the empire also loses influence, and attacks from outside also began. Finally, the last stage is decline and collapse. With no Asabiyyah left, the dynasty cannot resist new groups rising with fresh solidarity and discipline. A new tribe or coalition, still bonded by Asabiyyah, eventually conquers them, leaving the previous dynasty in ruin, and the cycle begins again. What makes Ibn Khaldun remarkable is not only the elegance of his cycle but also the method behind it. He was among the first thinkers to explain historical change through social forces rather than divine intervention. Asabiyyah provided a clear framework for understanding how societies rise and fall, while the dynastic cycle offered a model of how power decays. Even today, scholars use his theory as a lens to study state formation, nationalism, and the decline of great powers. His vision reminds us that every empire carries within it the seeds of its own decline, and that the unity which brings victory is always vulnerable to the comforts of prosperity.